Ladies and gentlemen, could you imagine if you are a housewife who has a husband that works as a Gojek driver? A Gojek driver, a job where it meant that they drive endlessly taking orders for 14 hours a day, and at last they usually operate for 12 hours a day. Then all of a sudden his salary as your husband is uncertain. Then his salary is uncertain, ladies and gentlemen. That's what the elements of a Gojek driver is. Just imagine further, if he gets a minimal amount of income that day, how would you, as a housewife, sustain the home operations? Sustain how your house works for that day, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, the lives like this, where one of the family members acts as having a job as a Gojek driver, this affects families in Indonesia, ladies and gentlemen. This motion that we're going to discuss later is not about whether Gojek drivers should be classified as employees. It's about whether do we choose quality or quantity. And we, as the proposition team, ladies and gentlemen, we strongly sided with quality. Now, what is the motion we're going to talk about today? The motion that this House would mandate that Gojek online platforms such as Gojek or Grab treat drivers as full employees with a fixed salary, even if it leads to a 50% reduction in the total number of drivers. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump to our point of definition. What is Gojek online platforms? Gojek online platforms are platforms of Gojek, which is motorcycle driver networks that pick up passengers and drop them in their designated order area. These, or Gojek, acts like taxis, and as the name has stated itself, it means that it is a network of taxi bikes via an app platform, such as in Indonesia we could find a lot of examples such as Gojek, Grab, and Maxim. Now, moving on to our next point of definition, which is fixed salary. What is fixed salary? Fixed salary are wages or salaries that are predictable, whether when it's the time the employees receive it or how much amount they got in that fixed salary. Now, moving on to our mechanism. The government mandates that Gojek platforms would classify drivers as formal employees, provide fixed salaries, provide BPJS, and comply with labor laws. Of course, yes, as the motion stands, it would reduce the percentage or number of drivers by 50%. But the remaining drivers that there are becomes stable in their salaries, protected by labor laws, and sustainable via their fixed salary. Now, before we could jump any further, let's us limit this debate to big city area in Indonesia, such as Jabodetabek, Jakarta, Bogor, Depok, Tangerang, and Bekasi, where the populations of Gojek or taxi bike drivers are most dense as a result of dense social plus economical activity. We think that it is sensible for us to make limitations here since this motion would eliminate a few populations, making the social plus economical activity in the area less crowded, making the traffic activity less crowded, ladies and gentlemen, by reducing the number of Gojek drivers. Now, let us jump to our first argument. This system, or this motion, is a proof that quality matters more than quantity. Okay, millions will lose jobs, but let's ask the question to ourselves. What jobs are we defending? What kind of jobs are we defending? And let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, this kind of job is where workers compete endlessly, absorb fuel and maintenance costs, and many more, such as working 12 to 14 hours jobs just to survive. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a job where workers are classified as independent contractors. They have no fixed salary, they have no guaranteed minimum income, they have no paid leave, and many more. Yet, platforms still use algorithm control, such as who gets orders, dynamic pricing, such as extra pay during rain, like complete 12 trips before 9 p.m. for bonus, and many more dynamics of algorithm control, such as ratings as disciplines and GPS surveillance plus data tracking. Of course, this strongly shaped the working hours and the behavior for the employees and the drivers, ladies and gentlemen. Now, that's not a sustainable employment. That is a surveillance. That is a surveillance system by the algorithm control. Now, ladies and gentlemen, success's measure system doesn't mean purely by how many people are working. It should measure whether civilians or citizens build and sustain stable lives. And by implying this model, workers can plan their future and also support their families more consistently, because smaller number of middle income workers matters more than millions trapped in instability. Now, moving on to our second argument, is platforms currently shift business risk onto workers. In a normal system, in a capitalism system, investors or entrepreneurs take risks. Companies absorb uncertainty and workers receive stability in exchange for labor, in exchange for how many years they are gonna be working for that company. But platforms like Gojek and Grab reverse this, ladies and gentlemen. Now, they reverse the mechanisms to the driver itself. Drivers absorb fuel inflation and traffic inefficiency, such as traffic congestion, ladies and gentlemen. And also the algorithm changes from the platform, which is sometimes cruel, as I've said before in my first argument. Meanwhile, platforms can freely change their paying systems overnight, and they can suspend drivers easily because of a bad rating. This creates imbalance where corporates maximize flexibility while workers absorb uncertainty. And our principle is, if companies and corporations want benefits of controlling the workforce and labor, they must also bear the responsibilities of employing it. They must also bear the responsibilities of employing the workforce and laborers, ladies and gentlemen. And ladies and gentlemen, by the arguments of how quality matters more than quantity, by the arguments of quality matters more than quantity, and also the cruelty of platforms to the Gojek drivers, we as the proposition team would like to stand with this motion.